The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. On leaving the synagogue, Jesus entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. They immediately told him about her. He approached, grasped her hand, and helped her up. Then the fever left her, and she waited on them. When it was evening after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases and drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and on finding him said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Let us go on to the nearby villages, that I may preach there also. For this purpose have I come." So he went into their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Is not life on earth a drudgery? We are a slave who longs to be in the shade. Remember that my life is like the wind. I shall not see happiness again. This person is having a very bad day. We may be able to relate to sometimes we've had bad days. We can sort of be in the doldrums, think life is a drudgery. The selection is taken from the book of Job, which was written about 500 years before the birth of Jesus. In most of the book, Job is in the garbage dump, sitting on a pile of ashes. He is so desperate and isolated. At the beginning of the book, he's very wealthy, has a nice house, got a wife, has children, lots of money. But then something happens and all of that is taken away from him. He loses his house, loses his wife, loses his children, all his money. Now he's desperate and alone. He's such of a pitiful sight that his friends come to the garbage dump and sit with him in the ashes. But they don't know what to say to him. He's so sad. And so they sit with him. Long time. Just sit quietly with Job in his misery. Good thing about this story, it does have a happy ending. Job eventually will get his wife back, have a nice house, get his children back, and all of his money. And the point of the account is to demonstrate how someone can lose everything and stay faithful to God. Job does not turn against God, not angry with God. He's just in misery in this garbage dump. But then things get better, and it all comes right. And so he showed his faithfulness to the Lord. And thanks to his friends who came out to be with him, they kept him from being totally alone. You hear that in the gospel today from the Gospel of Mark. We've heard for the last few Sundays this account of Jesus leaving the Jordan River. John the Baptist has been arrested and John's ministry is over. He's not coming out of jail alive. And so Jesus heads north back to the Galilee where he came from. And in the subsequent Gospels, we see him walking along the Sea of Galilee. He comes upon people he knows. Simon, his brother Andrew, who then find James and John. He knows them because they were probably all involved with John the Baptist's ministry. So they knew Jesus, and he knew them. And they all know that John is in jail and won't come back. And so when Jesus comes by, it's time for Jesus to begin his public ministry. He wouldn't do it in competition with John. Now that John's out of the picture, it's time for him to begin his ministry. Begin to gather his followers. So he comes upon Simon, Andrew, James, and John. And they all go to Capernaum, which is at the north end of the Sea of Galilee, which is where Simon and Andrew live. James and John have come along with them, and Jesus, they've taken them to Simon's house. And in Simon's house is his mother-in-law, who's ill. She has a fever. She's probably back in another room by herself, isolated. She's sick, and no one's with her. But Jesus hears that she's in that back room, and so he goes in there, takes her by the hand, and picks her up off the bed. She stands up. And whatever was going on with her, a fever, leaves her. And then she is able to do what culturally is appropriate for her as the woman of the house, and that is to offer hospitality to the guests. Maybe give them something to drink, feed them. That's her job, and Jesus has brought her back into her life. So she's not only healed of what her fever was about, but now she's reunited with life and has a purpose. As Christians, we too are called to reach it out to those who are isolated, those who are by themselves, those who are in need. That's what Paul is talking about in his first letter to the Corinthians, that we have a selection today. That he talks about his job is to preach the gospel. But that in order to do that, he needs to come down to the level that the people are at. If they're weak, he'll be weak. If they're by themselves, he'll be with them. He'll meet them where they are. And he does that in order to preach the gospel to them. Not be above them or talk down to them, but get down on their level. Like these friends of Job, sat on the ashes with Job, got down on his level, and just were with him, being present to him. And that's what Paul is doing. In order to preach the gospel, he needs to come down. He can't be on some pillar, on the high pillar above everybody. He needs to come down where the people are. And so we're called to do the same, to reach out to those in need. We're just a little ways away from the beginning of Lent. And so it might be appropriate this week, as we reflect upon this gospel passage and also this selection from Job, to reach out to someone we know. Maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a relative, maybe it's someone we just met or we heard about. Someone who's stuck in their house, isolated in their apartment, by themselves for some reason. Take the initiative, reach out to them. Just don't let them be in their misery and in their loneliness. But be like Job's friends and be willing to go down and, figuratively, sit in the ashes with them. Spend time with them. Invite them for dinner. Take them to lunch. Give them coffee. Do something to connect with them so that they're not alone. And so in that way, we follow the example of Job's friends. We follow the example of Jesus, who's gone in to deal with Peter's mother-in-law. And then also Paul, who's reaching out to those who are weak and are not involved in the culture or in society, but meet them on their own level. Take the initiative. Don't wait for them. We might have a tendency even to forget about them. Maybe we never thought of that person in a long time. Maybe no one's checked on that person. No one's reached out to them. Do they need anything? And so it's important this week, as we prepare our minds and hearts for the Lenten journey, to follow Jesus' example and reach out to the people in our lives that we know are in need and are isolated and lonely, and allow them and encourage them to come into life, come in to whatever the meaning is in their life, to help them, to support them, and help them, and just as Jesus did, just as Job's friends did, and just as Paul is preaching to us today.